Now, ladies and gentlemen, our beloved friends, we are happy to introduce to you Dr. Evelyn Aguirre. I'm happy to tell something about her. Dr. Evelyn Aguirre is a strong supporter of AQRA since 2015. 2015 is a significant year because that was the time that we started AQRA. This was the time that AQRA was born. And during the early years of AQRA, Dr. Evelyn Aguirre and the university where she belongs, and that is Leyte Normal University, have been very supportive of AQRA. And at this point in time, we just would like to express our sincere appreciation. AQRA is very grateful because of their support. AQRA is what it is now this time. Among the biggest contributions of Dr. Evelyn Aguirre to AQRA are the following. She has encouraged the participation of the faculty of Leyte Normal University to the AQRA Annual International Research Conference. In fact, every time since 2015 until 2019, LNU, that's the acronym of Leyte Normal University, has sent one of the biggest delegations, to AQRA Annual International Conference. And also, in addition to that, Dr. Evelyn Aguirre has inspired Leyte Normal University faculty and students to use qualitative approach. By the way, for those of you coming from other countries, we are happy the growth of qualitative research in the Philippines, especially now that many of our members are coming from higher education. I'm also happy to inform you all that Dr. Aguirre is an AQRA honorary platinum member, which has been our joy to grant to her because of her strong involvement with AQRA. AQRA family, we are happy to inform you that we are inviting you also, we are inviting you to join us in congratulating Dr. Evelyn Aguirre at this point in time during her appointment as the fourth president of Leyte Normal State University. Dr. Aguirre, please accept our heartfelt congratulations. Dr. Aguirre, would you like to say something?
Yes, ma'am. Good afternoon, our current president of the Asian Qualitative Research Association, Dr. Arceli Rosario, and the officers of AQRA right now. And of course, our big AQRA family, which has grown through the years, I think, if I am not mistaken, from 2015 and up to the present, and still counting and still growing. First of all, I would like to thank God for this very, very wonderful opportunity. I'm very happy today to be with you again because this is a very rare opportunity that I am together with you and you together with me because of the press of work. Actually, for over a year now or so, or nearly 2 years, I am not an absentee of AQRA because I always follow you, what's going on, your colloquium, your different conferences, your 2-hour conferences, webinars, etc. I would like to inform you that I am always with you, even if I cannot join you every day or every colloquium or every research conference. I am very, very happy to be a part of this organization because really, really, way back 2015, let me just give a very short story about AQRA. Way back 2015, when I was transferred or designated as Vice President for Research and Extension, actually, I didn't know what to do because really, research productivity is not one of our main forte because we are a teacher training university. And so I prayed in front of the tabernacle how I would guide my faculty members. We would have we would effect a growth in our research productivity in the university. And so with his guidance, with his grace and gift, he guided me and he inspired me, or he gave this just click of a finger, and I said, we are a teacher training university. And perhaps because these are teaching people, they love to talk, they love to write long stories. Maybe we could veer away from the quantitative research approach or methodology that we had that time, because really we're always into relationships, into regression analysis and all these things. But I said, I think this is the key. And so what I did was to survey the research literature at the library and see for myself what is the dominant research methodology in those researchers in the library. And I came to know that only all of our researchers were using, majority or 80% of it we were into quantitative research, and only about 20 or 15% or so was into qualitative research. And I saw, bingo, this is the answer, the qualitative research methodology. From there on, I directed our research director to look for someone who is an expert or adept on this research methodology, and there he found Dr. Safari. And then the rest is history, because from that time on, we engaged Dr. Safari. But Dr. Safari is not an ordinary teacher, because I also told him that we want outputs here. We don't want, we don't want theories. We have outputs. And really, really, at the end of that, I think it was a month stint with engagement with Dr. Safari, all these faculty members were able to submit the research proposals. And after a few months or so, nearly a year, I brought with me 46 faculty members to the first ever Asian Qualitative Research Conference there at Hotel Dominic in Cavite. Well, the rest is history. All of this, we have been in constant engagement with Dr. Safari and, of course, Dr. Rosario. They were the foundress, or the founding pioneering people who really founded AQRA, Dr. Safari, Dr. Arceli, and Dr. Fukafuka, Sonia Fukafuka. And then David also, I think, was the treasurer at that time. They were really instrumental, no? And after these 46 faculty members went with me to present the research, from that time on, the engagement of Dr. Safari with us, the engagement of Dr. Arceli, Dr. Fukafuka, and then I think I forgot the other one who also came to the university to engage with us on qualitative research and different methodologies and approaches and techniques in qualitative research. All of that now is history, because all or most of our faculty members are already conducting research, be it a senior faculty, be it a junior faculty, and of course, even our middle-aged faculty. They have all embraced now the qualitative research methodology. And here and there would always be a request for publication. We did not only represent, but there are already a lot of publications of these faculty members, and they have already been published in reputable, internationally refereed journal. And so we attribute all these things, the upsurge of research, the upscaling and the upskilling of the research competence of the faculty members and even the research staff in the university. We owe it much to the AQRA, the Asian Qualitative Research Association, and the founding members of the Asian Qualitative Research Association, the founding officers of the AQRA Research Association, in the person of Dr. Wamambaleka, Dr. Rosario, Dr. Foca, and the rest of the AQRA family. I would also like to acknowledge the AQRA and Ayas, you have been a big part in my journey to the presidency. Why? Because one of the things that was asked of me, even during the question and answer portion of which was live streaming via FB Live, if you watch it, and also in the closed door interview, I was asked by one of the reputable and the prestigious high caliber members of the search committee for the El Nino presidency, composed of no less than the chancellor of the chair of the Chancellor of University of the Philippines, Los Baños, by the person of Chancellor De Vera, no? Chancellor Camacho, Chancellor Jose Camacho de Vera. This committee, this very, very high caliber committee asked me a very important question, and he said, how would you like to be remembered during your stint in this many VP stint? Because I was designated as VP for academic affairs, VP for research and extension, VP for VP for academic services, then back again to VP for Academic Affairs, then finally VP for Administration and Finance. And they asked me a very important question. How would you like to be remembered in all of those administrative stints that you were into? And you know what I answered? I said, I would like to be remembered as the Vice President who was instrumental, by the help of the AQRA, instrumental in the upsurge of research productivity in the university. And because of this, I said I would like to take up and go up a little higher by going into innovation this time. All of this we owe to the AQRA family, our AQRA family, and all the rest of you who were with me and still with me in this journey, this very big journey when I get the presidency, or now that I am occupying the post. Now, we will not stop there. This is just the beginning, no? It's no joke to be a president of the university. We would like to continue our engagement with you, with the AQRA family. I hope you will always be there with us, supporting us, and we working together. We would like to continue this partnership with you, with IAS, and of course the AQRA. We cannot forget you because, as I have said, you were with us in our journey towards the increase and optimum growth of research productivity in the university. But I would like also to stress this, that I celebrate with you today this with my heart full of joy because of these graces, and we celebrate also the goodness of the Lord. No, without Him, we are nothing. And I offer also together with you today this great faith for a greater glory of God, and but of course, before anything else, for the greater glory of, or in the service of, humanity, and finally for the greater glory of God. Again, thank you very, very much, our AQRA family, for your profound recognition. And I hope to see you soon after the pandemic. And I hope to continue our engagement with you, not only today, over the years and the years to come. God bless us all. God bless AQRA. Mabuhay tayong lahat. Mabuhay AQRA. Mabuhay ang Leyte Normal University. At mabuhay tayong lahat. Thank you very much, Dr. Arceli. I don't want to take up so much of your time. I know that you still have a 1.5 hour or so, 2 hour only, for a very, very important discussion or presentation of a very good research, which I saw the title a while ago. I hope to be with you all the rest of the 2 hour period. But if I cannot be with you, but rest assured, I am with you in prayers. And one day we will meet up really, really, really soon in person. Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. And may the good Lord bless us and keep us safe always. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you for your inspiring speech, Dr. Gary. We wish we could hear some more. Upon your request, this is a special request. Carol is going to sing a prayer song for you. Carol, please come in.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Whom you desire, oh
Thank you so much, Carol. And Dr. Gary, I hope that you have been inspired by Carol's gift to you.
Thank
So
you.
we are, yes, wishing you many blessings. And now I
Thank
would
you very
like,
much, ma'am. Thank you very
most
much, ma'am Arceli.
welcome, our upcoming virtual conferences. Kindly note the dates and also the dates of our AQRA colloquia. Please keep posted in the AQRA FB page for our advert posters. Uh, it's my joy to introduce to you our first presenter today, Dr. Teofilo Esguerra. He holds a PhD in education with specialization in educational administration and cognate on curriculum and instruction from IAS. He earned his bachelor's and master's degrees from the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He teaches at the College of Education of the Adventist University of the Philippines and serves as the Director for Records and Admissions. Prior to serving at AUP, he was a missionary teacher at Palau. He is married to his lovely wife, Edna, and they have two sons, 10 and 6 years old. So I would like to invite you, join us in the presentation of Dr. Esguerra titled Spiritual Programs of Adventist Higher Education Institutions in the Philippines, an Appreciative Inquiry Case Study. Dr. Esguerra, it's now your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arceli. A pleasant good afternoon or good evening. Ever since the pandemic happened, time has no longer been an issue in our meetings. So I'm very glad to have been invited by AQRA to this colloquium. And thank you for that invitation. And of course, I welcome everyone. Um, I am a product, of course, of IS. And I'm very glad that even if virtually, I can join my extended family once again. Let us now start with the presentation. I'd like to give you at least an overview of my paper, my dissertation entitled Spiritual Programs in Adventist Educational Institutions, Higher Educational Institutions here in the Philippines, for which I did an appreciative inquiry case study. As a background, Adventist schools, including Adventist higher educational institutions which span throughout the world at the moment, are actually tasked to train young minds with Bible-based values as well as spiritual vigor. And it is an enduring identity for AHEIs to look into the issue of spirituality and its spiritual programs that it implements in its portals. However, there are, and I found it in my exploration, that gaps do exist in dimensions such as the standard description, methodology, and approaches in studying both spirituality, the concept of spirituality, and its resulting spiritual programs in these institutions. In my paper, I explored the clarity, or at least questioned the clarity of spiritual programs in Adventist higher educational institutions, how they plan them, how they implement them, and how they evaluate these programs in order for them to reach their mandate of spiritualizing the stakeholders of the institutions. And I found that there is an inadequacy of secular interpretations, at least for spirituality, especially with the published book by Aston and Lindholm, um, where they explored the status of spirituality through the spiritual programs being done by different universities and colleges in the United States. This exploration led me to try to choose appreciative inquiry as an approach in looking into spiritual programs, as this was not done before, as well as developing an innovation configuration map so that this may be utilized by the AHEIs, especially the ones in my study. Now, I proposed in the study that I really wanted to discover how the Adventist higher education institution stakeholders, which included students, faculty, staff, and their administrators, on how they defined spirituality in order for them and in order for me to be able to find out what best practices they had as spiritual programs in their institutions. And I also made sure that I wanted to develop the IC map, or the Innovation Configuration Map, which will become a basis for the implementation of spiritual programs in these institutions. So I had these 6 research questions. There is actually a lot. I asked how the stakeholders define spirituality, which was the main concern of spiritual programs. And I asked what best practices these AHEIs had in terms of their spiritual programs. And how do these AHEIs intend to strengthen their best practices in terms of spiritual programs? I also wanted to know how or what programs could be designed and implemented in order for spirituality to be promoted through spiritual programs, and how these institutional spiritual programs can be sustained by the stakeholders. And finally, I wanted to know what possible components and variations of innovative spiritual programs are needed to be implemented or at least drafted for these AHEIs. Now, my theoretical framework used Sharon Park's faith development theory, as bordered also by Fowler's development theory of faith. But I utilized Park's development theory more, as this really had an impact on higher education. So in the theory, it was mentioned that there are different forms of faith. The faith of knowing, the form of knowing, which is the cognitive side of faith, the forms of dependence, the emotional side of faith, and the forms of community, the social development of faith. And as I would quote Sharon Parks, she said that the higher education community, which I was studying, is a mentoring community for spiritual development, especially among young adults, which was a model that I kept as part of the framework in theory for my study. Of course, it was meant to be, or I utilized a qualitative approach, which was generally an embedded case study. Embedded case study made sure that the cases that I had would form a larger case with the sub cases embedded within that study that I had. And let me also mention that I used extensively appreciative inquiry as part of my methodology. Appreciative inquiry has been utilized in uh, uh, many different iterations, many different contexts. But this is one of the few times where appreciative inquiry was a very good uh, method to use for this particular topic. One thing about appreciative inquiry is that it aims to find out what is the positive side of the organization and what it does. What does it do right? What positive things happen, or what best things happen in the organization or institution that makes it work? And so Cooper Ryder uh, was one was the one who put forth this particular method, wherein originally it was called the 4D. 4D, which stands for discovery, which asks about what best things are there to discover that, and then it the institution or the organization can actually dream or imagine what could be about what is being practiced, what works. And then the third D is design, and that is to plan what will be in order for these best practices to continue to become innovative, to continue to flourish, to continue to emulate positivity within the organization or institution, and then deliver, creating what will be or the innovation being sustained. Now, later on, the 4D became 5D in order for the beginning of the method to define first what is being focused on or what is being emphasized in this particular institution or organization as an identity. We need to define what it is that makes this an institution that has something very good or best to offer. And so, because a lot of methodologies, especially not comparing though with quantitative methods, but what spiritual programs and spirituality have as very unique is that it's a very personal construct, which is between different levels and different aspects of the organization, may have differences, but has a specific unified goal. And therefore, what I wanted to do in this paper was really not just to quantify what's going on, how is it being done, but I wanted to dig deeper into what best practices are happening when it could have been easier to actually explore what the problems are in delivering programs, which is usual for many explorations and investigations. But for my paper, I was able to utilize appreciative inquiry and its strength of getting the best thing that is being done in these institutions, and therefore because of those best things, I will be able to formulate a certain model. But that model is unlike any other because that model is in the form of an innovation configuration map. And this is a visualization of an IC map. It kind of looks like a rubric. No? Many of you who are teachers are familiar with rubrics, but for this is more of a map that tells us what does that innovation look like? What does that program look like? When we implement it, are we implementing that program properly? And the innovation configuration is one of the dimensions of CBAM, which is the concerns-based adoption model. And among its other dimensions are levels of use, which is a tool that allows us to gather how a certain innovation is being used, as well as the stages of concern, which is how the stakeholders interpret certain innovations, and to come up with an IC map allows an organization such as schools, institutions such as colleges, that we can know whether what we're doing it is what we're supposed to do because we describe that particular concept in the form of components and levels of those components into descriptive means of into descriptions that allows us to see what exactly do these programs look like. And this is also one of the methods and outcomes and outputs that I was able to create. Now let me tell you about samples that I had and sampling criteria. My setting was of Adventist higher educational institutions in the Philippines, for which there are several. However, I simply did purposive sampling in order for me to have one institution for each major island of the Philippines. And so I went to Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao to explore with these institutions their best practices in spiritual programs. I had as my participants from these institutions the presidents and spiritual life directors. I also attempted to have at least 5 to 8 faculty and staff for each institution, and at least 5 to 8 students for every institution. Um, so I was able to go to these 3 institutions whose years of it as criteria should have existed at least 25 to 100 years. One of the AHEIs I visited actually had already went beyond 100 years of existence. And then the president should have served at least 2 to 3 years in the institution, while the spiritual life director at least 3 months. The spiritual life directors acted as my gatekeepers. They were the ones who recommended the faculty, staff, and students who would join me in my focus group discussions. Of course, I had faculty and staff members who should be at least full time employed and at least 3 months serving the institution, and students who should have been enrolled in during the semester when I visited them, and must have studied at least for 2 semesters in that institution. So I ended up with 2 presidents because unfortunately one of the presidents was unable to answer my call for interview. I had 2 spiritual directors, the same thing, and I had a total of 17 faculty and staff and 38 students for my focus group discussions. As you can see, I was able to do interviews with the presidents and spiritual life director, while I did focus group discussions with the faculty, staff, and students separately. I did observations, I did stay in these campuses, and made sure that I also did document analysis for spiritual programs that had documents such as spiritual master plan documents. My data analysis framework was based on Braun and Clark's thematic analysis framework, where I did familiarization of data by using Otter as a transcription app. And then based on that, I was able to do initial coding and using in vivo. I did in vivo by importing all my transcriptions into in vivo, and was able to categorize the themes as I explored using in vivo. Um, did categories in themes, sorry. And then I was able to also review these themes and had to compare them to each other in order for me to come up with defined themes to distill their essences. I made sure that trustworthiness was practiced, of course, in my paper. I had credibility checks which utilized triangulation. I made sure that I was able to triangulate my data, and also did member checking. Transferability was done by making sure that I described the context of my topic in my paper, was able to do a detailed description of my methodology in order for my the dependability to be found in my paper. And so my methodology was so detailed from the moment we did definitions until I was able to come up with the IC map. And of course, through audit trails and my reflexivity statement, I was able to practice confirmability in my paper. Um, of course, I had to look into the ethics of getting or gathering my data, and so I had to ask from my appropriate committees, especially the ethics review board, making sure that I had confidentiality through informed consent as well, and then voluntary participation as they signed the informed consent, making sure that I manage data correctly, as well as the safety of my participants. And I only made sure that I collected data on the spiritual programs of these institutions. Let me now share to you the findings of my research. For my first research question, how did the stakeholders define spirituality? I found five themes. That was that spirituality is a relationship with God, a relationship with others. It is a purpose of life. It entails service and mission. And spirituality shares itself with the importance of the Bible and prayer. Some of the quotes that I can share with you include the purpose of life. I believe that God, through Jesus, is coming back. He's going to restore the world. These were the promises that they were holding on to as the purpose of their lives. In terms of service and mission, they find, what can you do through me? Those were the questions that several of these participants asked themselves, which entailed service and mission. My research question two, what are the best practices on the spiritual programs of these institutions? I found that there were four themes in their practices, including in-reach practices, which meant that they had to channel their spiritual programs into the campus, nurturing practices to sustain spirituality among the stakeholders, outreach practices where they extend spiritual programs to the greater community, and other institutional initiatives. One example for Enrich is they mentioned the week of prayer, or this is an assembly where students and faculty alike are able to have 1 week of listening to very relevant sermons together as a community. And then there were nurturing practices where the students had chances of having teachers pray for them, that the teachers were able to to have them as if they were mentors, spiritual mentors to them. And then, of course, I had a third research question: how can these best practices be strengthened? And I found two themes that were pervading, that the programs for spirituality, for the spiritual programs, needed evaluation, and that it must be followed by enhancement of those programs, and that in order for these programs to work, there must be access to both facilities such as church buildings, rooms, classrooms, and other resources, as well as training. For example, in program and evaluation, um, one student actually said that it is important for the school to nurture its faculty and staff, because they found that the faculty and staff may have their own struggles, and therefore they need to be nurtured, and there needs to be programs for them for their spirituality. For access to facilities, they wanted that the teachers will be able to be trained in order for them to integrate faith with their courses, with their subject areas. For research question number four, what programs can be designed and implemented to promote spirituality in in these institutions? I found three themes, and that was that there has to be faculty spiritual development, there has to be discipleship programs for students, and there has to be multiple approaches to these spiritual programs. Some of the quotes include that it is important, according to one of the presidents that I interviewed, it is important to start with the faculty and staff when spiritual development is concerned. Multiple approaches. One faculty member said that for them there has to be kinds of programs where they will have the program will have to target what the faculty members are facing in this case. And then we have research question five, which is how can these spiritual programs be sustained by the institutions? And I found these elements of sustainability. We have the administrators, we have the faculty, staff, and students. We also had policy, and we have evaluation. So these are the elements of sustainability. And in my last research question, what are the components and variations of innovative spiritual programs in the institution? So based on those themes that I found, and using appreciative inquiry, I was able to find the themes that uh, were converted into components of a map that will represent what best spiritual programs to be implemented in institutions should look like. And I was able to find 11 of them. First, there were the component of spiritual relationships. Next was grounding on scripture and prayer, sustainable spiritual administration, spiritual events, discipleships, planning and evaluation, the integration of faith and learning, the integration of campus and church programs, physical infrastructure and facilities for spiritual programs, residential life management, because all of the institutions were boarding schools. And this is a very important aspect of Adventist higher education, as well as the last being mission centeredness. In my map, there were three variations. A was for ideal, or what should be. B is what I found, and C is if we see anything that may be a poor implementation of that component. Here, I'm just giving you an example. One component is on spiritual events. So we can see that for the dimension of administration, we find that the ideal is for administration to provide complete resources and support to spiritual events such as Week of Prayer and spiritual retreats. For evaluation, the ideal is for the institution to implement evaluation strategies and tools that gather feedback on the experiences on the spiritual events. You can notice that the poor implementation results to either few or none of that particular description of that dimension. Another example, for example, the planning and evaluation. For faculty, staff, and students, it is meant to be that for planning and evaluation, the faculty, staff, and students participates in all of the stages of development and the design of the spiritual master plan. That means that they have to be part of planning the spiritual master plan. And I found that in a few of these stages, they did participate. But hopefully, we will not find that they did not participate in any of these institutions. So my conclusions include that stakeholders that I was able to study with have developed a deeply embedded awareness of the concept of spirituality, especially as a spiritual campus that they belong in. I also found that belongingness uh, was a very influencing experience among those who were with spiritual groups that provided meaning and purpose, especially among students. I found that faculty and staff play a crucial role to support spiritual programs, especially through integration of faith and learning and mentoring of students and co-faculty. Planning and evaluation also remain as a crucial feature so that administrators can or will be able to sustain aspects of its spiritual programs. I recommend that administrators can review the IC map that I found in, review their spiritual master plans by using the IC map that I was able to come up with in the study. And for the human resources, administration, and policymakers to use the IC map in order for the faith integration of faith and learning to happen. You might be wondering why human resource. It is when um, human resources will be able to select and hire teachers who are capable of integrating faith and learning. It is also recommended for the review of the faculty load so that they can be effective in participating in spiritual programs and to have innovative spiritual programs as delivered by student services. So that is all. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Esguerra. I would like to introduce Rancelin Bayeta, who is our panelist for this presentation. Rancelin is a PhD education with specialization in educational administration candidate at IAS. And Rance is also doing, for his dissertation, he is using appreciative inquiry. So Rance will ask 2 to 3 questions, then we will give time to answer the questions posted in the Q&A. And for the question and answer, it will be Dr. David Lumowa and Dr. Pavel who will facilitate the question and answer. Okay, Rance, you can now ask your first question.
Hello, Dr. Teo. Thank you for such nice and informative presentation. This study is we could consider very interesting and very relevant for us Adventist colleges and universities because we consider this as one of our defining characteristics. Now, in your study, you have blended or you have integrated 2 research designs, right? You have appreciative inquiry and you have also the case study. I would like to know, Doc, at what point or stage you have used appreciative inquiry and at what stage also you have used case study?
They were not really separate as you can see. In order for me to be able to initiate the appreciative inquiry portion of my study, I had to do embedded case study. The reason for that is it was imperative for my study to be able to study different institutions. Although these institutions are supposed to share similarities, however, because in appreciative inquiry, it would be best if I could focus on one institution. But because of the nature of my topic, which is spiritual programs, it was really important for me to I won't use the term blend because it's not really a blending, but it's more of the how case study designs work very well with how I had to approach my participants, at least the institutions, so that I can implement appreciative inquiry properly. Because without the embedded case study, it would have been hard to try to manage so much data and trying to put them together afterwards. Because yes, they may have had their similarities, but I also needed to make sure that I found the best from this campus, from this campus, from this campus. And therefore, putting them together was really important in my study. And by utilizing the case study design along with the approach of appreciative inquiry, I was able to get my the data to now merge very well, and I was able to put them in proper perspectives because of that integration of that methodology.
Thank you, Doc. That's an interesting interesting approach of solving this problem. Now, I would like to, my next question, Doc, is on the framework you have adapted, the 4D phases of copywriter. And then at the start of the cycle, you will have the discovery phase. It is during this phase that the participants have to recall, share stories of their successful, effective, memorable, positive experiences. But at the same time, copywriter also advised that at this phase, you have to determine the positive core. This is like the one that it's like the force that gives life to the spiritual programs that is responsible leading to the positive experiences of your participants. I would like to know, though, what are some of these positive core you have identified?
Yeah, but first to clarify, no, I almost did a 4D only, but in revisiting the literature on I had to adopt the 5D, which included
Yeah.
the definition
Definition.
phase. The reason for that is because I had to make sure that there was an understanding of what spirituality was supposed to be understood among stakeholders. And let me tell you, until now, there's not really a standard. There's still no standard definition. Within these groups, however, within these institutions, within the perspectives of the stakeholders, they had similar understandings. And now you're asking about that positive core.
Core, yeah.
No, and I believe that what happened in my studies that the positive core ended up being that definition itself. That because they knew for themselves, or at least they understood among themselves what spirituality is, they now were able to interpret what the spiritual programs were, in terms of their needs, in terms of their experiences, in terms of what they were doing, what they were planning for, what they were looking for, what they were evaluating, and so on. So the positive core ended up being what they were able to define, and it transferred all throughout the other phases of the AI process that I was able to implement.
So it's just like it's their conception. It's their
Yes.
idea about spiritual. That's good, Doc.
Yes.
This is my last and third question, Doc. Uh, w- on your third research question, that represents your dream phase, right, in the 4D cycle, and it is during this phase that you allow your participants to imagine. You like to co-create and dream for their desired future. Okay, to come up with what they wanted really for their spiritual programs. I would like you to know, Doc, what have you done to tap the imagination and the innovative skills of the participants to dream bigger, okay, that they could dream outside the box, okay, for them to also to plan for their spiritual programs.
Mm. Thank you for that question. Remembering how um, and I can still see their faces right now. Now that you mentioned it, no, especially when we were doing the exciting part about it was really during the focus group discussions, because we were doing focus group discussions with faculty and staff separately, and then I was doing focus group discussions with students separately, and the dreams that they had uh, really again resonated, as we can call it again, the positive core that they defined. They wanted a more transcendent, transformational, and relational. And that is actually part of my paper. I was not able to present it now. But that is those three things were all apparent in what they wanted to have as the spiritual programs in the institutions that they have, especially the students. Let me tell you about the students very quickly. How the students did it, although they knew that they were just transients in the institution because they were not really sure how they could stay there for 4 years, 6 years, and yet they will have to go. They still wanted their institution to keep especially the spiritual events, the evangelism efforts that their institution had. But then they wanted to make certain that their faculty and staff members continued to be spiritual, that the institution would cater to their needs spiritually, that they had programs that will continue to endure all throughout the institution's existence. And that's how excited they were to share it. And so among those was the mentoring that faculty and staff needed to have, the integration of faith and learning that needed to be institutionalized. No? A lot of faculty members, when I was able to interview them, saw the gaps between what they practice in the classroom and what should have been done. And they were really interested in making that an institutional part of their spiritual program. So these were just some of the examples that I found, and these really were things that they wanted the institution to have, because they knew that the positive, or the definition of spirituality, they needed that to endure all throughout the existence of the institution and how the institution was meant to be identified.
Thank you for sharing your answers, Doc.
Thank you
Right.
very much.
Thank you so much. We have exceeded time. I'm now giving the time to Dr. Pavel to facilitate, but I think Dr. Pavel, we can answer only 2 questions. Dr. Teo, can you please make your answer like short? Let's
Yes.
have 2 minutes for these 2 questions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Teofilo, for the insightful presentation. We have many questions coming in, and I would like to voice the first question. Thank you, Dr. Teofilo Esguerra, for this eye-opening research question. How do you handle data and appreciative inquiry that presents itself in negative form as against the anticipated positive input? This is coming from our faculty member, Dr. Alotse Gabassiani.
I'm very glad for that question, because that did come up when I was doing the study. That did come up. I was asking one of my panel members, how would I handle negative inputs when I was supposed to be looking for positive? The answer was just get them, gather them, because these negative inputs still contribute to what will come out, especially in the preceding phases of appreciative inquiry. It is not an unwelcome thing. It is an always welcome thing. And the words of my member, and I remembered, most of you remember Dr. Green, this is what he said. Dr. Green said, because appreciative inquiry can actually work with both the positive and the negative forms, because once you ask for the positive, automatically the negative forms will actually come out. And that was a very good experience in my paper.
Well, interesting. Thank you for expanding the borders of this design. From Dr. Janet Espada, coming question: how do I understand this Asian higher educational institutions communicate love? Adventist higher educational institutes communicate love within the educational platform.
Yes, that's a very transcendental question. It's existential, at least. But then I guess that's because it was a topic of spirituality. When I asked my stakeholders to define spirituality, this was actually from president, from the president of the institution all the way to the students. They always mention the word relationship. Because spirituality, they said one of its effects is actually the continuation, the creation of relationships. And because of that, I guess what my data really showed was that even if this was an institution of higher learning, this was also a place for relationships. And that, I believe, is what is meant by love here, the relationships fostered within that community and the relationships fostered within the spiritual realm, even in an educational institution.
Thank you so much, Dr. Teofilo.
Thank you.
up. We cannot answer all these other questions live, but you may continue to answer them while we have second presentation. We will be very appreciated for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pavel. And again, our heartfelt thanks to Dr. Teofilo Esguerra. The questions that you posted that are not answered orally will be answered by Dr. Teofilo while we have our second presentation. So now we would like to welcome Dr. Atsushi Iida. He is an associate professor of English and chair of foreign language education at Gonma University, Japan. He was awarded his PhD in English composition and TESOL at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. His research interests include second language writing, poetry writing, literature in second language education, and writing for academic publication. He has published his works in various journals, including Assessing Writing, Qualitative Inquiry System, Scientific Study of Literature, Innovation in Language Learning and Teaching, and English Teaching Forum. To the AQRA family, we would like to say that we are very happy to have found Dr. Iida. He was recommended to us by I think it was Dr. Tolik, who told me to contact him, and we are very happy that this afternoon he can present his study titled Poetic Narrative Autoethnography, Exploring Traumatic Experiences in the Great East Japan Earthquake. Dr. Iida, welcome. This is now your time to present.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, very clear.
Okay. Slide is okay too?
Yes, slide okay also. Thank you.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Atsushi. I'm an associate professor of English at Gunma National University in Japan. Today, I'm going to share about my research on poetic narrative autoethnography. And so basically, I'm going to share my qualitative study on traumatic experiences in the Great East Japan earthquake. Okay, so this is a lineup for today's presentation. The goal of today's presentation is to discuss the value of autoethnography in qualitative research. And then, my presentation consists of 4 parts. So starting with my researcher's positioning, and then we're going to discuss a bit about autoethnography. And then I'm going to describe my case study on poetic narrative autoethnography. And then I'm going to give you some implication for autoethnographic research. Okay, so now let me share my background of my research. Okay, so my expertise is second language writing. I'm from, TESOL, teaching English to speakers of other languages. So my field may be different from yours. So my approach slightly different from yours. So please understand my, researcher's positioning. I'm very interested in poetry writing, especially haiku writing. Okay, and my area of research consists of 4 parts. Related to 4 main parts: TESOL, composition, stylistics, and psychology. It's very interdisciplinary aspect of research, what I'm doing now. Okay, and this is what I have been done in my research. I'm not a pure qualitative researcher. I do quantitative, I do qualitative, and at the same time, I do both mixed method research. Okay, so like for quantitative research, I did, characterizing second language haiku writing, and also cross-genre literacy development, and mixed method research focusing on the value of poetry writing, and also looking at earthquake experiences. And for qualitative research, I, investigated the perception attitude of students on haiku writing. And also, I explored poetic identity, study abroad experiences, and second language learning experiences. And also, I'm interested in looking at the emotion and second language learning. And then the last part of qualitative research is traumatic experiences, which I'm going to share in today's presentation. Poetic narrative autoethnography, and then poetic representation. So as you can see from this, figure, you understand I'm pretty much interested in poetry writing, especially, how poetry writing can be used as a research methodology. Okay, so now let's move on. What is autoethnography? Are you familiar with that? So like autoethnography is not a new method in social studies, okay? But, it's fairly new to, new approach for second language writing research, okay? So now let me give you one basic and important definition. Autoethnography is an approach to research which seeks to describe and systematically analyze personal experience in order to understand cultural experience. So this is a basic concept, definition of autoethnography. Okay, so you're gonna use your own personal experience to try to find out some cultural issues. So what is the benefit of autoethnography? There are so many benefits of using autoethnography as a research methodology, but let me show you one clear benefit of using autoethnography. Autoethnography will enable researchers to take up each person's life in its immediate particularity and to ground the life in its historical moment. In other words, autoethnography has a potential to explore a specific life memory of the human individuals, including their voices, their thoughts, their emotions, and their experiences. So that's a good point of using the autoethnography. On the other hand, autoethnography is sometimes criticized by the following reasons. So let me show you two quotes. When the gaze is on one's own navel, one cannot see the ground upon which one stands or significant others standing nearby. So that's the one, critique. The other one is autoethnography should not consist solely of the researcher's opinions, but are also supported by other data that can confirm or triangulate those opinions. So that means, autoethnography should not be a simple reflection of the author. You have to go beyond the personal reflection or self-reflection. And then you need to, tie into some cultural issues. And then at the same time, autoethnography should have some lessons to others. Okay, so that's the basic point of autoethnography. So taking this idea to my research, now let me share to you about my research, poetic narrative autoethnography. I've already published this paper in Qualitative Inquiry. So when you are interested in it, please visit, the journal website, and then you can download it. And if you want the article from me, so please send me a message, and then I'll be happy to share my paper to you. Okay, so this is an abstract from this research. So I'm gonna take a few moments, so please read it for yourself. Okay, so now let me move on. I'm going to explain a bit about the background of the study. So the topic of this research is about Great East Japan earthquake, which occurred in almost 10 years ago, March 11th, 2011. And then, we had a, massive earthquake, a magnitude of 9.0 earthquake. And actually, we experienced, fairly big earthquake last week and last month. And it can be seen as an aftershock of this earthquake. So Japan still have a big earthquake after this big event. And then Great East Japan earthquake, of course, everybody knows how big, how massive the earthquake is. But at the same time, it causes resultant tsunami, big wave come to the, land, and then everything washed away. And not only tsunami, but also leak of radiation was another issue at the time. So there are so many, problems at the time. And then it was just messy and it was just horrible. But why am I interested in this topic is when when this event happened, I was not in Japan. So theoretically speaking, I didn't experience this earthquake. At that time, I was in the United States to finalize my dissertation. And I came back to Japan on March 21st, 10 days after the earthquake hit. I came back to Japan and then started to work. And my hometown was just only 220 miles away from the epicenter of the earthquake. So when the earthquake hit, I didn't really understand what was happening in my home country. And then my parents are, they are pretty much closer to the epicenter of the earthquake. So, this was very special moment to me because I never know what happened at the time. But, the thing is, earthquake hit to the Japan. And then there are two purposes to do the research. The first purpose is to investigate what was happening in Japan. I really want to know what happened at the time. The second purpose is to explore cultural trauma caused by the massive earthquake. So that's the two purposes. And then I set up the research question like this: how cultural or shared trauma is constructed and expressed through my own experience regarding the Great East Japan earthquake. So I'm going to explore cultural trauma, how cultural trauma is experienced by human individual. And then research design. Of course, I use autoethnography, as you can see from the title of my slide. But let me briefly explain how I did in my research. The topic of my research is Great East Japan earthquake. It's about my and other Japanese people traumatic experiences. And the purpose is, one more time, to explore cultural trauma, especially traumatic experiences, using the researchers, in this case, my own experience. And then the main data comes from 3 different data sets: researchers' poem, my own poetry written in English. And then I also collect the data from students, Japanese student English poem about earthquake experiences. And also I put the media discourse, newspaper articles on the internet. And also I collect the newspaper article in the United States. At the time I was there. And then I try to, make a narrative to make a connection between my poem and Japanese student poem and to media discourse. So that's the, basic idea of my research, okay? I use my own experience, But at the same time, I collect the student poem and newspaper articles to triangulate the data. So in this way, I try to see how voice is constructed and how each person's identity constructed through the poetic data. So that's the research design. And this is the data collections. And as for my poems, I wrote 6 poems in English, reflecting on myself. At the time, the earthquake hit. 6 poems that I wrote in the United States during the March 10th to March 20th. And then Japanese EFL student poem. English poem written by my students, Japanese EFL college students. And they took my class in 2011 spring semester. So like almost 3 weeks after the earthquake hit, new academic year begins in a Japanese university. And then I taught them English. And then one of the assignment is to write their own experience of Great East Japan earthquake. And then poetry writing is one assignment for literacy practice. And then they write it. And then as for newspaper articles, I use like newspaper articles, Indiana Gazette, issued on March 10th through 15th. And also I use the internet, Yahoo, on March 10th to 15th. So in this way, I have a newspaper media information from US side and Japanese side. So in this way, I can compare how different information is provided through the media. And now let me show you my poem. So I'm gonna take a moment. So please read the poem for yourself. All right. So now in the next slide, I'm gonna show you one of my student poems. Okay, once again, I'm gonna give you a few moments, so please read the poem by yourself. So as you can see from the data, my poem is much longer, of course, but English is my second language, and my poem is not good enough. I mean, like it may not be so sophisticated, but it's very descriptive, and then you can recreate my experience by reading this poem. Student poem is much shorter, but considering their proficiency level, I think this is the level they can perform in English as a foreign language. Okay, and then using these data, so this is a data analysis. So as for researcher's poem, I did a linguistic content analysis, and Japanese EFL student poems, I did Brown and Clark's theme analysis. So this is a 6 stages to do theme analysis. Become familiar with the data, generating initial codes, searching for themes, reviewing themes, defining, naming themes, and then presenting the data. And as for newspaper articles, I coded it and then try to see what is the issue at the time in the US media and Japanese media. Okay, and then one of the critique about autoethnography is, too much subjective viewpoint. So in order to avoid that, critique, deal with the problems, I decided to triangulate the data using different data set and then, recreate that experiences. And then, there's no problem for me to use my own poem as a research. But, for students, I distribute the informed consent forms. And then, I clearly explain this is voluntary participation, no effect on the final grade. And then data will be used after submitting their grade. So in this way, it's fair. Another issue I have to deal with is the topic, okay? Because traumatic experiences for students, they are not ready to share their traumatic experiences at the time. So in that case, I gave students an option. So like I use the basic idea of flip out rules proposed by Penny Baker. If you fear that you might get too upset while writing about a particular topic, don't write about it. If you think that something will cause you to flip out, write about something else. So I use Penny Baker's ideas on flipped out rule to my poetry writing lessons. Okay, so now let me share the major findings. So like, what can I say from the data from my poem? The collection of my earthquake poetry, so that means my experience outside Japan. So I could see various identities. For example, identity as an international student living the last minutes of his study abroad life in the United States. And identity as a Japanese who worried about my family, care about the situation in my home country. Identity as a grandson who blamed myself for being unable to accept my grandmother's death and attend her funeral. So like 4 days after the earthquake hit, my grandmother passed away. Earthquake is not a direct, factor for her death, but it happened in my life. But I couldn't attend her funeral because of the chaotic situation in Japan. And then, my poem shows you like different emotionality, such as survivor's guilt, right? I survived in the United States, but I feel guilty because I couldn't live with my parents. And then nothing happened to me at the time, but my parents suffer from the earthquake. So this kind of survivor guilt, I could find out from the poem. And feeling of remorse and empty feeling, because I couldn't share my emotion to other people. And then like, once again, my family really was suffering from the traumatic experiences, but I don't know how to touch on it. And what about student poem, their experiences in Japan? So there are so many different emotional responses I can find out from their poems, such as fright at the occurrence of the earthquake, fear of aftershocks, sadness and shock regarding terrifying impact of tsunami on devastated areas. So every time you watch the TV, the scene came out. So it's kind of like flashback, phenomenon happens to students. And worry about invisible radioactivities. So this is, the first experience for many Japanese people because, a big tsunami hit to the, nuclear power plant and then it destroyed and the radioactive component outside the plant. So that's why, nobody can see it, but, we might be infected frustration and confusion in their ongoing post-quake life, and despair at being unable to support evacuees, and then anxiety for the future. So as you can see from emotional responses, my student felt different type of emotion at that time, not only negative emotion, but at the same time, a slightly bit about, regret or powerless, which cannot help anybody. Okay, so now let me conclude my study. So cultural trauma is experienced differently by each individual. And this poetic narrative autoethnography makes invisible personal event which media didn't broadcast visible. So this is the benefit of poetic autoethnography. Okay, so like media just focus on how many people died, how many people are missing. So these kind of numbers are important to communicate the scale of the earthquake. But we have our own different experiences related to the earthquake. So it is more important to see how individual, what they experience through these traumatic experiences. And also, poetic narrative autoethnography makes it possible to appreciate this traumatic national event, not only at a social level, but also the personal level. So that's why I do believe autoethnography is a very useful, powerful tool for human sciences. Okay, I guess time is running out.
No, it's okay. You can have 6 minutes more.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so now let me briefly explain what qualitative research looks like. In qualitative research, we can emphasize researchers' subjectivity, right? But on the other hand, we need to show validity, how valid the data is. And especially autoethnographic research, that may be too personal, right? So in order to avoid that criticism, you need to use triangulate data, researcher, theory, and the method. So you can triangulate in a different way to, highlighting the validity of the research. And through these triangulations, we are going to, explore characteristics of human individual or particularity of the phenomenon. So that's how, qualitative research goes. So like going back to the definition of Denzin and Lincoln, they said qualitative research is a situated activity that locates the observer in the world. So it's very situated. It's very contextualized activity. Okay, so that's why we need to use a lot of data to see one phenomenon. It consists of a set of interpretive material practices that make the world visible. So that's, qualitative researcher's viewpoint. Since I use the poetry, so let me clearly explain, how valid poetry as a qualitative data. According to Hanawar, there are 4 benefits of using poetry as a research methodology. Poetry helps to understand and recreate writers' experiences and process of personal discovery, access emotional insight, and subjective linguistically negotiated construction of meaning. So poetry is very emotional text. So that's why it's easy to, access what each writer or what each learners experienced. And then using poetic data, we can see voice and identity. Okay, so that's the powerful tool to identify who they are. But at the same time, we have an issue of validity. So in order to develop the validity, we need to do member checking. But at the same time, you need to do triangulation of the data. So in this way, we can take qualitative research as more valid way to do it. And then, is poetry valid data for research? And according to Hanawa, the answer is yes. Poetry can be a true representation of the real world if the world that is being presented is one of individual understanding of experiences. If the data source is valid, the analysis, evidence-based and explicitly described, the result should be justifiable knowledge. So that's why, I use poetry as a main data for my research, and then poetic data can be a useful tool for qualitative research. Okay, that's pretty much everything about my presentation. Thanks for your attention.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Atsushi. This is something new for us, especially thank you, especially toward the end when you explained how poetry can be data. That's very interesting to me, and I'm sure also to our other participants today. This is now time for our question and answer. I would like to introduce to you our panelist, Dr. Leo Aberion. He is an AQRA partner. We have been working together for many, many years now. He is also an English professor, and we believe that he can really heighten or even deepen our understanding about your presentation through his questions. Dr. Aberion, it's now your time to ask your questions 2 to 3. And then Dr. Pavel, we have like, I hope we can give like 5 minutes to entertain our questions in the Q&A box. Dr. Aberion, please come in.
I think he's still in the attendee sessions. Let me promote him.
Oh, yes,
He
please.
clicked the same, he clicked the wrong email.
Oh, dear. Okay. Okay. Right. Yeah. Oh, so perhaps while Dr. Aberion is still being promoted, Dr. Pavel, can you please ask the first question here, the one at the topmost?
That's right. I will suggest, I think that's...
Yes, okay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Iida, for an interesting presentation. And I would like to ask this question from Dr. Olaotsa Gobasiane. Dr. Iida, thank you. How did you address the critiques of ethnography to make sure your study trustworthiness for its findings and conclusions, especially that you were not present at the earthquake when the earthquake took place? So, Dr. David, would you like to project this question?
Sure.
Okay. It will be on the screen right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the questions. So like my positioning as a researcher, when you write this paper is second-hand experience. So that means, I didn't experience the earthquake experience. So that's why, I have to rely on student poem written by, student who actually experienced the earthquake. So that's one, standing point. I developed the research.
There is a follow-up. Excuse me. Did you finish already, or there is a follow-up for that?
Okay.
What percentage was your what was your actual reflection since you got some input from others? Dr. David, can we add?
Sure. Let me just...
Yeah, Dr. Pavel, we can finish this question and then Dr. Aberion is now here. Yeah, all right. Okay. Yes, Dr. Pavel, which question do you want
This is
answered?
this is a follow-up question for the first one from the same person.
Okay. Yeah. Dr. Atsushi, would you like to answer this? What percent was your actual reflection since you got some input from others?
It's kind of difficult question to answer. I don't count, the percentage.
Yes.
So pretty much, I stick to the data about my experience. I focus on my poetry to analyze it, but that's too subjective, I guess. So that's why, I use student poem at the same time. I check the newspaper articles to triangulate, to recreate that experience. So I don't think I can answer this question.
That's perfectly fine. Thank you so much.
You're really welcome.
Okay, so now we give the time to Dr. Leo. Please go ahead, Doctor.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I would like to congratulate Dr. Atsushi for that very interesting and wonderful, at the same time challenging study. So this has been always considered by myself as an interesting, especially when we talk about autoethnography. It's a combination of biography and ethnography. So this is challenging because it is a form of self-narrative that places ourselves, yourself, in a social context. So in your study, I was very interested because Japan has been experiencing several earthquakes. Uh, that was the in your study that was on 2000 in 2011. So but I would like to go back in your title because your title was on poetic narrative autoethnography. May I just ask what particular area is the poetic aspect and which one is the narrative one in the study?
Okay, so poetic is based on the poetry written by myself and my students. And one of the criticisms I got from the journal reviewer is student poem is not a poetry. It's like a poetic description.
Yeah, okay.
But, I try to see it as a poetry because it's not like an essay style. It's very short and then succinct. And also emotional aspect is there. So that's why I decide to, define it as a poetry. And narrative point is I couldn't clearly explain in my presentation this evening. But, when you have a chance to read my paper, so I try to recreate the experience in a narrative form. So try to make a connection between poetry and other data through my narratives. So in order to understand student poem, so that my interpretation comes in to understand student experience. And in order to recreate it, I need to make a narrative style. So that's how I use the narratives. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I thought you consider also the newspaper. That's one part of your triangulation, right? Document analysis to validate your your findings of the study. So it was not part of the narrative aspect, the document analysis.
It's not. It's more like, to try to figure out the evidence. So it's more like an objective style, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a media. And then but at the same time, what is interesting point is if you compare two media, Japanese newspaper and US newspaper, their focus is different. So Japanese people suffering from, based on my understanding from the internet Yahoo News, it tells us, how serious in terms of the earthquake and the tsunami, but US media focus on radiation. So I was very confused at the time because I was outside Japan and then I don't even understand what was happening at the time. So that kind of, emotions are interesting to explore. So like if I were in Japan, probably that could be my first-hand experience. And then, I don't have to get confused because, I was in Japan and then I can try to fix the Japanese media. But at the same time, I couldn't see the other side of, the media information.
Okay, thank you. So I understand that you have been experiencing earthquakes before going to the United States. Am I correct?
So
Have you experienced earthquake before going to the United States to conduct this study?
So I didn't experience the earthquake.
Other
But
earthquakes aside from the March, yeah, other earthquakes previous.
Other earthquake.
Oh yeah, before 2011.
Yes, like earthquake is almost every day, but it's not that serious. I mean, like magnitude is much, much smaller.
Okay. So my next question is, if you were present in that at that particular moment of the experience, do you think your findings would be different or will be the same with those from the students?
Well, the result will be absolutely different because, once again, qualitative research is very, contextualized activity, right? Practice. If I were in Japan, my positioning is in Japan. So that's why, I couldn't probably conduct this research because it may be too much. And my traumatic experience is more serious than what I have now. So that's why, since I was in United States at the time, probably that's a good motivation for me to start this project. But, if I were, devastated in Japan, I couldn't probably do this research.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Atsushi. So thank you very much for your presentation. I'm planning to use this or utilize this with my students, especially in literature and to conduct my studies. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Thanks
thank
for your
you
questions.
so much. Now, Dr. Pavel, maybe we'll entertain only 2 questions and then we have to end. We have 6 minutes to go.
Okay, great. So let's go back to our participants and their questions. Question from Janetta Spada. How would you describe the difference between how the Japanese dealt with traumatic experiences in the early years and in today's modern times?
That's a good question, but I'm not ready to answer. Because like cultural trauma is experienced differently by individual. So like in my case, I just experienced a big earthquake last week, and then I start to feel close to, the evacuees because, compared with the earthquake in 2011, the one I experienced last week is much smaller, but still I was frightened. So yeah, that's kind of a difficult question to answer.
Mm-hmm. That's okay. Let's go to the next question from Natasha Sinagangoy. Dr. Atsushi, I thank you for the insightful presentation. What inspired you to choose your students as your main participants of the study and not use other category of people?
Well, that's a good question. But, the reason why I decided to assign my student to write a poem is, some student might have, traumatic experiences which they cannot share to anybody because their family might have the same situation. So in that case, I think writing as a therapeutic writing helps them to release their emotion. And when I start this project, I was not trying to use their poems as a data because, I've never known what's gonna happen to them. And I didn't understand, how much they're ready to share their experiences. But, after one semester finishes, they are willing to share their poems to me. So that's why, I decided to incorporate it in my study. So the starting point of the study is to just stick to my own experience by using my experience and as a media, document.
Great, thank you. Dr. Sally, may I ask one more question?
One more. Okay, go ahead. One more.
2 minutes more. Um, Saranjit Gladstone, how is it an ethnography when your data is triangulated with others' data? So again, coming back to the issue of what we already discussed.
So once again, poetry writing is the main data, and then I use, media discourse as a, supplemental data. But, just using 3 data has no connections. So by incorporating my, narrative as an interpretation of the experience, so this is a process of how we recreate the story, right? So that's how I use the, triangulation.
I think, Dr. Iida, the question here is like, is that okay? Is that acceptable in autoethnography to use other sources of data?
I think so. Because like autoethnography is to explore some cultural issues, right? So that's why, we need to tie together to some social component in it. So that's why, using as a data can be, useful because, we have to go beyond self-reflection.
Yes, beyond self,
Right.
self. And
then
that's right. In autoethnography, you do not only talk about yourself, but you situate where you are by also describing what is going on around, and your use of the media, the newspapers, meets that kind of requirement where you are situating where you're feeling like that, and also your description of where you were at the time, right? And then where your students were when they were writing their poems. So I think so, yeah. That's a very good question, because usually our understanding of autoethnography is that the data comes only from the self. So I think that's enlightening to our participants today. Your presentation that, yes, you got from the newspapers, and you got also, you also situated your reality with the reality of your students, right? Okay, Dr. Pravil, sorry, it's already time. So, David.